Hello, NarraScope. I hope you're having a great time. My name is Amanda Whitney. I'm a narrative designer, and today I'm going to be talking about narrative in a box, interactive fiction in the physical world. A cold case only you can solve. A missing friend you must find using only her tarot deck. A decrepit box with an ominous message that mysteriously arrives at your door. These are just a few of the now many examples of what I have come to know as narrative tabletop games. You might know them as other things like escape rooms in a box, you might know them as mystery boxes or take-home puzzle games or whatever, what have you. Whatever you know them as, these have been around for a few years, but really gaining in popularity over the last couple of years with the pandemic and everything. What can I say? It's fun to get mail. And what I've really enjoyed about these experiences is seeing the storytelling potential in them, seeing what changes when you bring these game elements into the physical world. What changes, what can it use to its advantage, and what challenges they face. So that is what I'm here to discuss today. So I'm going to give a little bit of an intro to see, what exactly am I talking about here with these tabletop games. And then I'm going to talk about how they actually convey the narrative. So through the documents and props, the actual physical pieces, and then also digital mediums as well that can support the narrative. And then finally, I'll be getting into the evolution of it. So I'm going to go through a few examples of games that already exist that, just do some interesting things. That's not to say that, they're the only ones that do this, but they're at least the ones that I've played, and they do things that I would like to see more of in the future as well. So with that being said, let's get into it. So what even are tabletop narrative games? Oh my goodness. So let's get to defining it. And believe me, even when trying to figure out a term to give this, it wasn't a definitive term. I asked the community as well. These are still new enough that there's no definitive definition I could find anywhere, so I did attempt to make one up myself. So narrative tabletop games are a form of interactive fiction in which a player or players discover a narrative through physical objects, documents, and or other resources. And they often involve puzzles. Not always. Not every narrative tabletop game out there involves puzzles, but a lot of them do, to varying degrees. Like any new medium, they didn't, spring up whole cloth. There are influences there. One of the more obvious ones being the escape room, which, exists in person. The presence of puzzles and the physical props are a big influence on how some of these earlier games were designed. In fact, a lot of even though escape rooms in a box came out before the pandemic, when the pandemic came out, you could tell, designers were trying to find another way to make some money, and putting an escape room in a box was the most logical thing to do. As well, there are tabletop games, and this helps with the general length. The influence I see here is the general length of the experience, as well as the fact that it's designed for a team of players rather than a single player, and there's physical pieces involved there too. The general length is like 2 to 4 hours. Alternate reality games are also a big influence. Alternate reality games, ARGs, they use real-world elements to help build a world and immerse the players more easily into it. And that can involve fictional websites, social media, emails, all sorts of things, even phone calls, to just kind of heighten that sense of immersion, heighten the sense that the world you are in is real, and tabletop narrative games absolutely do that. And then, of course, digital interactive fiction. There's a lot that these games can draw from, including just the fact that there's text-based narrative, that there's some character interactions that go on, kind of remind me a lot of text-based adventure games and that kind of thing, the use of multiple choices from time to time. So digital interactive fiction definitely has an influence on these games. Now, how do they actually flow, narratively speaking? Well, that, I'm not going to get too far into it, or I'm not going to do a quick deep dive, because that would take far more than half an hour, but this is generally how the flow goes. That doesn't apply to every game, but from the games I have played, they usually involve these elements. So first things first, the players open up a box or an envelope or whatever, and they're given their intro. This is where the backstory and their main goal is conveyed to them, often through the use of an intro letter, which I will be getting into. Once they have their intro, then they review all the materials available to them. So this is where, you look at everything you have in front of you and try to figure out where to start. Then we get to the solving phase. So this is where the players actually solve the narrative, solve and discover the narrative. And the narrative is often gated through puzzles, and those puzzles can be linear or non-linear, meaning that they can be solved in any order. And this is for the very practical reason that, if there's a team of players playing, you got to give everybody something to do. So nonlinear puzzles make the most sense. It also means, though, that the narrative is now being solved in a nonlinear fashion as well, or being discovered in a nonlinear fashion. However you solve your puzzles, however you solve the narrative, it all culminates into the climax, where players learn the final solution and submit it. Sometimes it may involve a plot or puzzle twists in which the players have to suddenly make a decision. Maybe there's a last-minute betrayal, but regardless, they usually have to submit a solution. Could be through email, could be through an online website, whatever, what have you. Once that climax is reached, then we have the conclusion, the denouement, the falling action, where players then learn the consequences of their actions. And this might involve a closing letter or closing email or other, right? Could be a closing video as well. And that's generally the flow that it takes. And it's pretty standard to see that. I would love to see, I'll get to an example later where they actually play around a little bit with that, but I would love to see some mix up in this, but this is solid. This is generally how it follows a pretty good line. So how do we actually go conveying that narrative? Well, we have a few things at our disposal. So let's talk about documents and props, the bread and butter of these experiences. Often the biggest appeal of them, right? The reason people buy this is because of the tactile nature of them. You like having an actual document in your hand. You like to see a real prop that kind of just makes you feel that much more part of the world. Or you just might like the prettier props, right? You might just want a knick-knack for yourself. And these are often the biggest appeal, but also the biggest storytelling potential. So let's start with documents. I'm going to go through a couple that you will pretty much see in almost every game. So we'll start with the intro letter, which I mentioned earlier. Now, the intro letter is a common device that's used to give the player's backstory. It is the key document in your entire experience, whether it's an email form, whatever form it takes. The intro is just so key because it outlines your goal, it sets the tone of the game, it introduces the main character, it is the opportunity to give that main character a voice, to give them flavor, to get players attached to them in a way. It also defines the player character's roles, if any. Detectives, maybe they're long-lost relatives, maybe they're just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Whatever it is, this is where they can find it out. And not most importantly, but equally importantly, it provides a starting point. So, especially with nonlinear puzzles, players can very easily feel overwhelmed by what to do first. And so the intro letter is the opportunity to kind of just provide a little clue, a little nudge as to where they can actually look first, and then from there they can do whatever they want. But luckily, it's good to have a little bit of guidance in there. It also is one of the longest documents in the entire game, and one of, because it does convey a lot of backstory, one of my challenges is often to get that intro letter below 1,000 words, trying to figure out what's important to know, what's not important to know, what is just flavor text, because despite the fact that they have all the time in the world, there's no timer on these games usually. The players do get bored of reading, especially if they're reading out loud to an audience who doesn't want to listen. Another document you will see is the journal. So the journal, you see these in video games all the time, right? In the Myst series and whatnot. So journals are a very common way to convey character backstory as well as hide clues. It's the easiest thing to do, and you will find them in the bigger games. There's usually always a journal of some sort. They can vary in length. So the one that's up here that you see here is actually, this journal. And it is the largest journal that I have. So this is like, I don't know, like 50 pages or something like that. It is a long journal, and it can be tricky, right? Because you want your players to play, you want them to enjoy it. And I enjoyed reading this out loud to my partner for 2 hours straight, but not everybody will. And again, it leads to a player bottleneck problem, where if you have one person who's holding the journal and it has all the clues in it, it means that first, not everybody can experience the narrative necessarily, and it also means that their frustration goes up because the one clue they need is in a journal that somebody else is holding on to right now. And then other documents. There are all sorts of opportunities here. Like, the list is just endless. I have a few things listed here. I realized that one thing I didn't put on here was photos. But, letters between non-player characters, maps, telegrams, post-its, magazines, newspapers, advertisements, pamphlets, government records. All of these are options to you when making your game, when making your experience. And they can just have so much packed into them. Not just through the words either, but through other elements. So things that you might need to consider for your documents aren't just, what is written in them, isn't just the content, but it's, the state of that document. First, how old is it, right? How weathered is it? I don't know if you can see it here, but I have an old letter that I had pictured earlier, but you can see kind of how it's yellowed with age here. And it's those little details that really count, right? You want to see what material you should use. Is it newsprint? Is it thicker paper? Is it a notepad that somebody just used at school? This helps build your world, right? It helps to give an idea of the world that this document came from. Even handwriting. This one designer I worked with has a handwriting person because he needs someone with really nice cursive writing. So you have to consider who is writing these documents, who is writing the notes, what would their handwriting be like? Even, and layout, right? Are there any graphics that you need to use? Really do your research on what those graphics should look like, because for the nerds that are gonna look at your documents, like the graphic design nerds or even just the history nerds and that sort of thing, they are going to, they're going to go to town on what's, on how good your document looks. But this one here, for example, is a catalog printout, and just the detail that there's printing on both sides of it is really nice. It makes me feel like it's just that much more real. At the same time, make sure that people can read your documents, that the important information on there is going to be legible and large enough that people can read it. This is a trap that people fall into. If your immersion level is, if the amount of immersion somebody feels is lower than the frustration that they're feeling, then it's not worth it. So you can make a document as pretty as you want, but if people can't read it, then they don't care anymore. They're frustrated. And then other things. Again, it's just the little details. Is it torn up? Are there tear stains? Are there blood stains? Are there stamps showing where it came from? Did somebody crumple it up? What was their emotional state at the time that they were reading this note? When was the last time somebody touched this document? All of these things are factors that you should consider. And then there are props. Oh my goodness, props. Props are a wonderful way to convey the narrative through the environment and immerse the player into the world. And they can be as simple as or as elaborate as you like. But if you are involving props in your game, then it's going to be more expensive to make. So one thing, you have boxes, jewelries, knickknacks. You can also have just belongings from other characters. Like one game I had, I found the character's paintbrush that they used. Again, it gives you that nice little extra tactile feel to them. With props, there's certain things you want to consider. Again, ownership. Who did the object belong to? That might affect what it looks like. Like a teddy bear belonging to a child might be more used, right? The kid hugs it a lot, drags it around a lot. Maybe it's a little dirty. The age of the object, again, much like the documents, the fact, whether it's weathered and beaten or pristine, really gives you a sense. It's a good environmental cue for, what this object went through. Practicality. So this is an interesting one. Will they actually be used in puzzles? Are your props going to be used in puzzles? And people actually differ on their opinions of this. So, not every, and I'm okay either way, but not every game, not every prop has to have a puzzle purpose. In some games, they just simply exist to build the world, to kind of build the mood, to give you a sense of who owned this. It's more of a character development thing. But there are other people, and I know I said I don't care either way, but I kind of lean more towards this way, where they want the props to have a practical use as well. They want them to have a narrative purpose as well as a puzzle purpose. So those keys that I had in there earlier, this is from a defunct game, so no worries. Those keys that I showed in there earlier, this has the narrative purpose of kind of giving clues as to who owned them, but all of these bits belong to puzzles as well. You'll see QR codes on here as well. The teeth of the keys even have a puzzle purpose. So if you can manage to get those two things married together, it just kind of ups that fun factor as well. So I always recommend to just make every bit in your game useful. Sometimes props can have hidden depths to them. So this is the really fun bit of these experiences as well, is the discovery aspect, is doing some revealing and transformation of the props and documents, really. So some props might have a secret compartment or hidden element within them. I wish I could show you more pictures, but unfortunately that would ruin the experiences at that point if you should choose to buy them. But that's always the fun bit. Something you've been staring at for a long time that's actually been hiding something all along, including destructible bits. And that's something you have to be careful of as well, is if a puzzle is destructive. One game that I played had a prop that I actually had to kind of break open to get something inside of it, and I was very hesitant, but I also felt it felt kind of thrilling, right, to be able to do that. I was driving that narrative forward, and it's always exciting to see that, those little bits of discovery, as well as transformation. So unlike revealing, this is where you've been looking at a prop for a long time, and it transforms in some way. So it could be, a good example of this is origami, right? A document that suddenly you need to fold up that reveals something new about it, a secret message of some sort. So being able to transform a prop that you've been staring at for a long time into something else is fantastic. It just makes it, again, that much more fun. We'll talk a little bit about digital pieces. So not every game has digital pieces to them, or in other words, it used the digital mediums to help convey their narrative, but they can be a really powerful tool. One of those is websites, right? Fictional websites are very common. The one I'm showing here is from a game called The Emerald Flame. Don't worry, it's not showing anything like game breaking at this point. So they'll make up a fictional website, and it just, again, gives you more of a sense of the world, and kind of makes the fact that it's on the web, the fact that you have to search for it, makes that world just a little bit more concrete. It makes it a little bit more tangible, and it kind of just helps get you into that story a little bit more. There's all sorts of things that you can put into websites. Bio pages to introduce players to different characters. Databases, searchable databases, kind of gives it an element of authenticity. The fact that you might have to actually search through something and there's multiple options for you to search through kind of makes it exciting. Using audio, videos, or photos, digital photos, again, very powerful tools, videos and audio, and a great way to actually give your characters a literal voice. And then other secrets, right? Secret links embedded into the website itself. So this is kind of fun. It makes me feel like a hacker. So I have had a game where I've actually had to look for the source code of a website. I had to learn how to do that once I realized what the clue was telling me. And it's super fun. It's just, again, you feel like the best hacker in the world, even though somebody else designed this. Digital hint system. So this is where digital IF also can come into play. And I wish more games used chat systems. I totally get why they don't. So some games use automated chat systems as their hint systems, so that rather than you just looking up a hint online or whatever for the game, they actually have you interact with a character to get your hint and also to submit solutions to. I get why they're not used often. It's a lot to program, and, you know, they're fairly rudimentary right now. I would love to see these played around with more, because it is such a great way to involve the players more in the actual narrative, to involve them, to get them interacting with the world itself. And it provides additional flavor. And then it also just gives the characters an actual voice. So I would love to see this more. Again, this isn't revealing anything, but this is an example of a chat system that I went into to try and, you know, get a hint, submit my answers, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's just a nice little way. I'm a sucker for dialogue, so I always like seeing it. I always like seeing opportunities to actually interact with the characters on a one-on-one basis. As well as emails, right? Same kind of thing with the emails. They're sometimes used as a submission method, where if you put in the right subject line, you'll get an automated response back. And it's an opportunity to have a character. So instead of getting something that just says you win, you actually get an email from a character with some context, with some explanation, with some backstory, and it, again, just kind of makes the world feel that much more tangible, especially when you're using your own email to get this, right? The fact that I have to go into my email makes me just feel like I'm actually solving this mystery or actually on this adventure. All right, I have a few minutes here. I wanted to talk a little bit about some games that already exist in the world that I have played and some interesting things that they are doing. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Box 1, and it's from Theoryll. This is the most commercial game that I am presenting here today. It is Neil Patrick Harris's game. You might have already heard of it. You can get it in Target in the US, and if you're in Canada, you can pay a buttload of shipping to get it to you. But regardless, it is a one-player game. It is designed for one player. You don't have to play it with one player, but that is who they recommend it to. And what I really like about this one is it has such a great use of discoveries, and it's a fun narrative. I would love to see more narratives in these boxed experiences kind of poke fun, kind of like, you know, just enjoy themselves a little bit more, and Neil Patrick Harris's game absolutely does. The player very much drives the narrative of this one, and I would say more about what it does well, but if I do, I will ruin the experience. And if you go on the website and stuff, you know, the moment that you open the box as well, it tells you, don't tell anyone about this. Don't say anything. You don't want to ruin it for everybody else. So it's not a perfect experience, but if I went into that, I would be ruining it. But definitely, it did some interesting things that I would like to see more of in narratives. The Vandermist Dossier from Diorama Games. So a bit of a disclaimer, I did work on this game, and so I'm a little bit biased, but I swear I do try to be fair. This game I really enjoyed working on, and I, in fact, enjoyed playing it afterwards as well. And at its heart, it's a game about a woman who is looking for her sister, and that relationship is what I really appreciated about it. I would really love to see more of that in these experiences as well. The fact that it's so character focused before anything else. Yes, there's a plot. Yes, you need to know what's going on, but the relationship is what really drives this narrative forward, and at its heart, it's about two women who need to reconcile. As well, the puzzles and documents make sense to the world, right? These are all documents from the 70s. There are no online elements to this game. And while I'm a sucker for the digital mediums, I love seeing the fictional websites and everything, I really appreciated that little attention to detail, that if this was a cold case from the 70s, of course there wouldn't be anything online about it. And there's some interesting transformation moments in there too that's very appreciative. Root of All Evil. This is from Crack and Nut Mysteries. So Crack and Nut Mysteries is definitely on the more expensive side. So it's, but what I really appreciate about them is they have what I like to call head-to-toe immersion. They really try to pay as much attention to detail right from the start of the experience to the finish. This box here, it arrived, this is basically, apart from the cardboard box that it came in, this is how it arrived to me. Nailed shut, nothing else, no explanation, wasn't shrink wrapped or anything. It was just a decrepit box that was nailed shut. And man, that was quite, I already felt like I was in a horror movie the moment that I started this. So this is some, they do some great stuff. And the other thing they do that's very interesting is that the game experience doesn't end when you end the game. It ends, there's the denouement drags out a little bit in such a wonderful way. So when I finished this experience, I thought I was done, right? I had done the action I needed to do. The game was technically over. I felt a little bit anticlimactic, but I went on with my life. And then about a month later, or maybe it might have been just a couple of weeks, I got a letter in the mail, a decrepit-looking envelope that had some follow-up for me. And not only did it have follow-up, another thing that Cracking Up Mysteries does is it will put your name in the documents as well. Not just with this game, but with their other games as well. They want to try and involve the player as much in the narrative as possible. So you are named in many things, and it just made me feel like my horror movie ending had suddenly come, and I got chills with this ending. So, again, really interesting stuff that they're doing. It's not a perfect experience game flow wise. I puzzle wise, I felt it was the weakest of what I'm mentioning here, and the fact that they have no hint system whatsoever really bothered me. That's the level where I'm like, yes, it's immersive not to have a hint system in this game, but at the same time, I was very frustrated at some points, and I didn't care if it meant breaking immersion. I just wanted someone to give me some help. Light in the Mist. So this one is the newest one that I've posted on here of the ones that I've played. This one is doing the most clever thing with the mechanic that I have seen yet. So this is it is a tarot deck that is being used to find your friend. So the story is that your friend is lost in the woods and you have to find her. The tarot deck has puzzles embedded into it, and based on how you solve them, and you can solve them in any order you want, you sort of discover her story along the way. So the mechanic itself is unique, but what it also does that I haven't seen a lot of games do yet is it explores tougher subject matter, such as grief and depression, and that is really appreciative. Another small disclaimer, I did some very light consulting work on this one very early on in the process, and I do have to say, like, it's just very, appreciated that these particular games, not just games in general, are starting to tackle this subject matter. So I would love to see this go further as well. And finally, The Case of the Haunted Dollhouse, the L. Delaney's Mysteries. This one, unfortunately, is not for sale anymore. I got it as a birthday gift. It was stupid expensive, but so worth it. This one technically had puzzles in it. It definitely was one that focused more on the narrative and building the narrative. But the narrative was literally baked into the environment. You were literally building the backstory. So the story with this one is that you are trying to piece together what happened to a certain woman who was committed to an asylum back in the 30s, and while she was staying there, she was trying to build a dollhouse, and you receive this dollhouse in the mail broken up, and you need to rebuild it and discover what story she was trying to tell through the dollhouse. I cannot express enough how much this nails atmosphere. I cannot express enough the attention to detail. So the person who made this is a miniature artist, and just like you see the little cardboard bits in there. I really wish I could show almost everything, but just all those little documents you see on the top floor there, they are all miniatures of the letters in the actual game. And I felt so involved from start to finish, and it stayed with me for months afterwards. The only thing I'll say is that sometimes the puzzles are a little too well hidden. I don't think I've discovered every puzzle in there yet. In fact, I kind of want to revisit it. But I wanted to point this one out. These games are, they are on the pricier side, but I think they can do such interesting things with storytelling, and I can't wait to see what they do. I hope that we use more chat systems. I hope that we get more moving, deeper stories. Not to say that I love a good adventure. I love a good horror movie. I love, simple stories like that. That's why they work, is because they're just so effective. But to see different types of subject matter tackled is very interesting. And most important of all, it's just a new way to tell stories. So thank you so much for this talk. I hope that I've inspired you to try and, if not make one, at least play one on your own and see what they have to offer. If you have questions, there's my contact there. Thank you very much to NarraScope and the team there for all that you've done. I'm a narrative junkie, and I can't wait to see the rest of the conference. Thanks, everyone.